The ecclesiarchy, the state church of the Imperium of mankind, does not simply punish those who turn from the Emperor's light. They break them. Body, mind, and soul. This is not justice. This is purification through suffering. And every scream is a prayer. My name was Marcus Vale. I say was because the man I once was no longer exists. He died in the confessional chambers of Shrine World Ophelia 7, screaming the Emperor's name until his throat bled. What remains is something else. Something hollowed out and refilled with faith forged in agony. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand how the ecclesiarchy breaks heretics, you must first understand how they found me. I was a scribe in the administratum on Hive World Kratos Prime. My life was numbers, records, tithes calculated to the last decimal point. Boring work but safe, or so I thought. My crime was not grand. I did not worship the ruinous powers. I did not summon demons or preach rebellion. My crime was doubt. One night, exhausted from a 16-hour shift, I made a joke to a coworker. Just a stupid, thoughtless comment about how the God Emperor seemed distant, uncaring about the billions who suffered in his name. The coworker reported me within the hour. In the Imperium, faith is not optional. Doubt is heresy. Heresy is death. But death would have been a mercy compared to what came next. They came for me 3 days later. Not the Arbites, the law enforcement of the Imperium, but something far worse. The Fraterus militia, the military arm of the ecclesiarchy. 12 of them in crimson robes, their faces hidden behind skull masks, their hands clutching shock mauls and restraint chains. They broke down the door to my HAB unit at midnight, dragging me from my bed before I could even understand what was happening. No trial. No chance to explain. The ecclesiarchy does not traffic in explanations. Your neighbor accused you. Your coworker reported you. Someone heard something, saw something, suspected something. That is enough. In the Imperium, you are guilty until proven faithful. And proving your faith requires suffering beyond imagination. They threw me into the back of an unmarked transport with 7 other prisoners. All of us accused of heresy. A woman who owned a book with the wrong prayer inscriptions. A man who failed to attend Mass for 3 consecutive weeks. A child, barely 12, who drew a picture of the Emperor with the wrong number of fingers. These were my fellow criminals in the eyes of the ecclesiarchy. These were the damned. The transport took us to the Cathedral of Eternal Penance, a massive Gothic structure that dominated the upper spire of the Hive. From the outside it was beautiful. Soaring buttresses, stained glass windows depicting the Emperor's saints, bells that rang on the hour with a sound like angels singing. From the inside, it was hell made manifest in stone and iron. They separated us immediately. Men to one wing, women to another, children to a third. I never saw any of my fellow prisoners again. I hope their ends were quicker than mine. But I doubt it. The ecclesiarchy believes suffering purifies the soul. The greater the sin, the greater the suffering required. And in their eyes, all heresy is the greatest sin. They stripped me naked and shaved every hair from my body. Not gently. Rough hands with rougher blades, drawing blood with every stroke. This was my first lesson. You have no dignity before the Emperor. You have no privacy. You have no rights. You are meat to be purified or destroyed, and the ecclesiarchy will decide which. Next came the branding. A novice priest, his face beatific with religious fervor, heated an iron in a brazier until it glowed white hot. The brand was the Aquila, the 2-headed eagle symbol of the Imperium. He pressed it into my chest, directly over my heart. The pain was instant and overwhelming. I screamed. He smiled. "Let your suffering be an offering to him on Terra," he whispered. "Let your pain wash away your sin." The brand was just the beginning. The ecclesiarchy has perfected the art of breaking heretics over 10,000 years. They know exactly how much pain a human body can endure before death. They know how to keep you conscious through injuries that should render you catatonic. They know how to make every nerve-ending scream in unison while keeping your mind clear enough to understand exactly what is being done to you and why. They call it the regimen of purification. 12 steps designed to strip away heresy and replace it with absolute, unquestioning faith. Each step is more brutal than the last. Each step breaks something inside you that can never be repaired. By the time you reach the 12th step, You are no longer human in any meaningful sense. You are a shell filled with scripture and pain. Step 1 is isolation. They threw me into a cell barely large enough to lie down in. No window. No light except what filtered under the door during the daily feeding. No sound except the drip of water somewhere in the darkness and the distant screams of other prisoners undergoing their own purification. Time became meaningless. Was I there for days? Weeks? Months? I had no way to know. The darkness swallowed everything, even my sense of self. Isolation breaks the mind in subtle ways. At first, I tried to stay sane by counting. I counted the drips of water, the meals they slid under the door, the number of breaths I took. But eventually, even counting became impossible. My thoughts fragmented. I began to forget who I was, why I was there. The darkness became everything. I was the darkness. And in that darkness, I began to hear voices. The voices were not real. I know that now. They were hallucinations brought on by sensory deprivation and malnutrition. But in that cell, they were as real as my own heartbeat. They whispered terrible things. They told me I was forgotten. They told me the Emperor had abandoned me. They told me to give up, to confess to crimes I had never committed, to embrace the darkness and make it end. I do not know how long step 1 lasted. But eventually the door opened. Light flooded in, blinding after so long in darkness. Hands grabbed me and dragged me out. I could not walk. My legs had atrophied from disuse. My skin was pale as a corpse. My eyes could not adjust to the light. But they did not care. They dragged me down stone corridors, my knees scraping on the floor until... Step 2 is confession. But this is not the gentle confession of a loyal citizen seeking absolution for minor sins. This is confession extracted through pain. The chamber of first confession was a large room dominated by a single piece of furniture. An iron chair bolted to the floor, covered in restraints and fitted with electrodes at every contact point. The confession chair. I had heard rumors of such devices, but seeing it in person was far worse than any rumor could convey. They strapped me into the chair. Restraints around my wrists, ankles, neck, and forehead. I could not move even a fraction of an inch. Then they attached the electrodes to my temples, my chest, my groin, the soles of my feet. Dozens of contact points, each one a potential source of agony. A confessor entered the room. He was an old man, his face lined with decades of service to the ecclesiarchy. His robes were pristine white, a stark contrast to the filth and blood that covered me. "Marcus Vale," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You stand accused of heresy. Doubt in the God Emperor's love. Blasphemy against his divine plan. Do you confess?" I tried to speak, to explain, to tell him it was just a joke, a moment of weakness after too many hours of work. But my voice was a croak. My throat was dry from disuse. The words would not come. The confessor nodded as if he had expected this. "Then we must help you find your voice," he said. He pressed a button on the control panel beside the chair. Pain exploded through my body. Every electrode fired at once, sending currents of electricity through flesh and bone. My muscles spasmed uncontrollably. My teeth clenched so hard I felt one crack. My vision went white, then red, then black. And through it all I screamed. I screamed until I had no air left in my lungs. I screamed until my throat was raw. I screamed until I thought my heart would burst from the strain. Then it stopped. The confessor waited patiently for my breathing to steady. "Do you confess?" he asked again. I wanted to confess. I would have confessed to anything to make it stop. But I could not speak. My throat was too damaged. I could only nod desperately, hoping he would understand. He did not press the button again. "Not yet. Confession must be spoken," he said. "The Emperor must hear your words, not see your nods. We will wait until you can speak. However long that takes." They left me in the chair for hours. Or maybe days. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, a medici came and forced water down my throat, just enough to restore my voice to a painful whisper. Then the confessor returned. "Do you confess?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I confess." "Confess what?" he pressed. "Say the words. Name your crime." I doubted, I rasped. I doubted the Emperor's love. And And I was wrong. I was a fool. I am sorry. Please, I am sorry. The confessor smiled. It was not a kind smile. Good, he said. Your mouth speaks the words, but does your heart believe them? That is what we must discover next. He pressed the button again. The pain returned, even worse than before. My body, already weakened from isolation and the first round of electrocution, could barely withstand it. I felt something tear in my chest. Blood filled my mouth, but still the current flowed. Still the pain consumed everything. Step 2 lasted for 3 sessions. Each session began with a question. Do you confess? Each session ended with me screaming my sins to anyone who would listen. I confessed to doubt. I confessed to blasphemy. I confessed to heresy I had never committed, crimes I had never considered, just to make the pain stop. But confession is not enough for the ecclesiarchy. Confession is only the beginning. Next comes penance. Step 3 is physical penance. After the confession chair, they moved me to the hall of mortification. This was a long chamber lined with implements of torture, each one sanctified by the priests, each one designed to bring the penitent closer to the emperor through suffering. They started with the whip. Not a simple leather whip, but a barbed scourge blessed with holy oils and inscribed with scripture. Each lash tore skin from bone. Each strike was accompanied by prayers to the emperor. The priest who wielded the whip was young, his face alight with zealous devotion. Through pain we find purity, he chanted with each strike. Through suffering we find salvation. Through blood we find the emperor's love. He struck my back 40 times, once for each word of the heresy I had spoken. By the 20th strike I had stopped screaming. By the 30th I had stopped feeling. By the 40th I was barely conscious. But the ecclesiarchy does not allow unconsciousness. That would defeat the purpose. Suffering must be experienced fully, consciously, completely. A medici revived me with stimulants. My nerve endings, which had mercifully shut down, roared back to life. The pain returned tenfold. I screamed again. The priest smiled. Good, he said. You are still with us. The emperor still has use for you. Next came the penitent's walk. They forced me to crawl on my hands and knees across a floor covered in broken glass and salt. The glass cut deep into my flesh. The salt burned in every wound. The distance was perhaps 50 meters. It took me 2 hours to complete. Behind me, I left a trail of blood. Before me stretched only more pain. When I finally reached the end, collapsing in a heap of torn flesh and exhaustion, they simply picked me up and made me do it again. And again. And again. 12 times in total, 1 for each step of purification. Physical penance lasted for what I later learned was 2 weeks. 2 weeks of daily torture disguised as religious devotion. 2 weeks of whips and chains and implements I had no name for. 2 weeks of pain so intense that I began to dissociate from my own body, watching from somewhere above as they broke me piece by piece. The ecclesiarchy calls this the first stage of enlightenment. When the body breaks, the spirit can finally hear the emperor's voice. Step 4 is psychological conditioning. After physical penance, they moved me to a new cell. This one was different from the isolation chamber. This one had light, bright fluorescent lighting that never turned off. This one had speakers built into the walls. And from those speakers came the voice of the emperor. Or rather, what the ecclesiarchy claimed was the emperor's voice. A deep, resonant voice that spoke scripture day and night without pause. The same passages repeated in an endless loop. The Creed Imperialis, the Catechism of Hate, the Litany of Faith, over and over and over. At first, I tried to block it out. I covered my ears with my hands. I hummed to myself. I recited counting exercises to drown out the voice. But the voice was too loud. It penetrated everything. It became the only sound in my universe. After the first day, I stopped trying to block it out. After the second day, I began to listen. After the third day, I began to believe. This is the insidious genius of the ecclesiarchy. They break your body first so your mind has no strength to resist. Then they fill that broken mind with their truth, repeated so many times that it becomes your truth. By the end of the first week in the conditioning cell, I could recite the Creed Imperialis from memory. By the end of the second week, I believed it with every fiber of my being. The emperor protects. The emperor provides. The Emperor demands faith absolute, and I had failed him. The guilt was overwhelming. Not the manufactured guilt of forced confession, but genuine, soul-deep shame. I had doubted him. I had questioned his love. I deserved everything that had been done to me. I deserved worse. This realization, this internalization of guilt, is the goal of step 4. Once you believe you deserve the torture, once you accept that your suffering is just the ecclesiarchy has won, you have begun to break yourself. Step 5 is spiritual cleansing. This is where the ecclesiarchy moves beyond physical and psychological torture into something far more disturbing. They brought me to the Chapel of Redemption, a small prayer room dominated by a statue of the Emperor. But this was not the benevolent Emperor of imperial propaganda. This statue showed the Emperor in his aspect as the god of vengeance. His face was twisted in fury. His hands gripped a sword dripping with blood. His eyes seemed to follow me wherever I moved. A cardinal entered the chapel. He was ancient, his face more skull than flesh, his body bent with age. But his eyes were clear and hard as diamonds. "Marcus Vale," he intoned, "you have confessed your heresy. You have accepted your penance. But confession and penance are not enough. The taint of doubt still clings to your soul. We must burn it away." He gestured to a brazier in the corner where coals glowed white-hot. "Approach," he commanded. I obeyed. By this point, obedience had become instinctive. Resistance was no longer even a concept I could grasp. The cardinal lifted a brand from the brazier. This one was different from the Aquila brand I had received upon arrival. This one bore a skull surrounded by scripture, the mark of penitence. "This will hurt," the cardinal said, not unkindly, "but your pain will purify you. Your screams will be prayers. Your suffering will bring you closer to him on Terra." He pressed the brand against my forehead, directly between my eyes. The pain was unlike anything I had experienced before. The flesh of the forehead is thin and sensitive, rich with nerve endings. The brand seared through skin and muscle, touching bone. I felt something in my mind break, a final barrier giving way. I screamed, but my scream had words in it now. I was praying. The litany of faith poured from my lips unbidden. The cardinal smiled. "Good," he said. "The Emperor hears you." Spiritual cleansing involved more than just the brand. Over the following days, I was subjected to rituals designed to expunge any remaining heresy from my soul. I was forced to drink holy water mixed with ash from burned heretics. I was anointed with oils that burned like acid on my wounds. I was made to pray for 16 hours at a stretch, kneeling on broken glass until my knees bled and my voice failed. Each ritual broke me down further, reshaping me into something the ecclesiarchy could use. Step 6 is indoctrination. By this point, I was no longer the man I had been. That man was dead, burned away by torture and conditioning. What remained was a blank slate, ready to be filled with whatever the ecclesiarchy desired. They moved me to the Seminary of Redemption, a section of the cathedral dedicated to re-educating penitent heretics. Here, I joined dozens of other broken souls, all of us wearing simple gray robes, all of us bearing the mark of penitence on our foreheads. Our days followed a strict schedule. 4 hours of prayer, 4 hours of scripture study, 4 hours of labor, 4 hours of self-flagellation, 4 hours of sleep. Then the cycle repeated. There were no days off, no breaks, no respite. This was our life now, every day the same, every day a test of faith. The scripture study was intensive. We memorized entire books of imperial doctrine. We learned the names and deeds of every major saint. We studied the nature of the Emperor's divinity and our own unworthiness before it. But this was not mere academic learning. Every lesson was reinforced with pain. If you failed to recite a passage correctly, you were beaten. If you questioned a doctrine, you were sent back to the confession chair. If you showed any sign of independent thought, you were isolated and subjected to enhanced conditioning. The message was clear. Your mind is not your own. Your thoughts are not your own. Everything you are belongs to the Emperor, and the ecclesiarchy speaks for him. The labor was equally brutal. We worked in the cathedral's forges, manufacturing weapons and armor for the Fraterus militia. We worked in the kitchens, preparing meals we were not allowed to eat. We worked in the mortuary, processing the bodies of heretics who had failed their purification. The work was hard and dangerous. Injuries were common. Deaths were not unheard of. But death would have been a mercy. The real torture was knowing that this would be our existence forever if we did not prove ourselves worthy of redemption. Step 7 is breaking the will. By this point, most penitents have fully internalized the ecclesiarchy's teachings. They believe they are heretics deserving of punishment. They believe the emperor demands their suffering. They believe their only hope of salvation is absolute obedience. But belief is not enough. The ecclesiarchy must ensure that obedience is not just mental but instinctive. They must break the will entirely, removing any capacity for independent action. The method for this was elegant in its cruelty. They gave us a choice. Every day the priest would present us with a simple decision. Do you take the bread or do you go hungry? Do you wear the cloak or do you endure the cold? Do you take the medici treatment or do you let your wounds fester? Simple choices. But there was a catch. One option was always labeled as the emperor's will. The other was labeled as selfish desire. Choose the emperor's will and you were rewarded with approval. Choose selfish desire and you were punished. At first the choices were easy. The emperor's will was always the obviously correct option. But as time went on, the choices became harder. My first assignment was to assist with a woman accused of owning forbidden literature. She was young, perhaps 20 standard years. Her crime was possessing a book of pre-imperial history, a relic from before the emperor's rise. Such books are forbidden. They represent a time before his divine rule, and therefore they are heresy. She pleaded her ignorance. She begged for mercy. She swore she did not know the book was forbidden. It did not matter. Ignorance is no excuse. Heresy is heresy. I strapped her into the confession chair myself. I attached the electrodes with hands that did not shake. And when the confessor pressed the button, I watched her scream with the same expression of beatific joy that I had seen on the faces of my own torturers. I felt nothing. Not pity. Not guilt. Not even satisfaction. Just a hollow sense of duty fulfilled. This was my purpose now. This was what I had become. A tool for breaking others, shaped and sharpened by my own breaking. Step 11 is elimination of self. By this point, the individual is gone. What remains is a shell programmed to serve the ecclesiarchy without question. But even shells can crack. Even the most thoroughly broken mind can, under the right circumstances, remember what it once was. The ecclesiarchy knows this. So they implement step 11, the final stage before complete transformation. They take everything that remains of your identity and burn it away. They started by taking my name. Marcus Vale no longer existed. I was now penitent 14. Just a number, no different from any other penitent. My past life was erased from all records. My family, if I had one, would be told I had died in an accident. I had no history, no identity, nothing that connected me to the man I had been. I was born in the confession chair. My life began with breaking. Everything before that was irrelevant. Next, they took my memories, not through surgery or crude lobotomy, but through a more subtle process. They used a combination of drugs and hypnotic conditioning to suppress memories of my life before the cathedral. Every day, I was given compounds that disrupted long-term memory formation. Every night, I was subjected to hypnotic sessions where a confessor would lead me through my past, rewriting each memory, replacing reality with approved fiction. Over time, my actual memories faded like dreams upon waking. What replaced them was a story the ecclesiarchy had written for me. In this new story, I had always been a heretic. I had been born into heresy, raised in it, steeped in it until the ecclesiarchy had saved me. My parents were cultists. My childhood was spent in dark rituals and blasphemous prayers. I came to the cathedral not as a prisoner, but as a supplicant, begging to be purified. The torture was not punishment, but salvation. Every moment of pain was a gift, burning away the corruption I had carried my whole life. This was the truth now. This was what I believed with absolute certainty. Step 12 is rebirth. When the elimination of self is complete, when nothing remains of the original person, the ecclesiarchy performs one final ceremony. The rite of redemption. They took me to the highest chamber of the Cathedral of Eternal Penance, a room at the very top of the tallest spire. The walls were covered in murals depicting the emperor's victories. The floor was polished marble inlaid with gold. And in the center of the room stood a font filled with blessed water, purified through rituals that had taken 100 priests 100 days to complete. A cardinal presided over the ceremony. Not the ancient cardinal who had branded me, but another, younger but no less fervent in his devotion. Surrounding the font were a dozen priests, their voices raised in hymns of redemption and purification. And I stood before them, naked and marked with scars from my purification, the mark of penitence still visible on my forehead, waiting for my transformation to be complete. Penitent 14, the cardinal intoned. You came to us broken by heresy. We have forged you anew in faith. Do you accept the emperor as your God and master? I do, I replied. My voice was steady. There was no doubt in it, no hesitation. Do you renounce all heresy, all doubt, all weakness of spirit? I do. Do you swear to serve the ecclesiarchy in all things, to be their weapon, their tool, their servant until death claims you? I swear it. The cardinal smiled. Then be born again in faith. He pushed my head under the water of the font. I did not resist. I let the blessed water fill my lungs, let it burn in my chest. I stayed under until my vision began to fade, until I felt myself slipping away. Then strong hands pulled me up. I gasped, drawing air into my starved lungs. You have died to your old life, the cardinal proclaimed, and you are reborn in service to him on Terra. Rise, penitent 14. Rise and serve. I rose. Water streamed from my body, pooling on the marble floor. The priests continued their hymns, and I felt nothing. No joy, no relief, no sense of accomplishment, just emptiness. I was a vessel now, waiting to be filled with purpose. The ecclesiarchy would provide that purpose. They would tell me who to break, who to torture, who to kill in the emperor's name. And I would do it without question, without hesitation, without mercy, because I had been broken. And the broken cannot be whole again. They can only break others. After the rite of redemption, I was assigned to Confessor Hadrian's retinue. Hadrian was a master of his craft, a man who had broken over 3,000 heretics in his 40 years of service. He was not cruel in the conventional sense. He did not take pleasure in suffering. He simply believed, with absolute certainty, that every scream was a prayer, every moment of agony brought the heretic closer to the emperor's light. He would teach me to believe the same. My first week as his assistant was spent observing. I watched him work with a precision that bordered on artistry. He knew exactly where to place the electrodes for maximum pain with minimum permanent damage. He knew which questions to ask to break down psychological defenses. He knew when to apply force and when to apply kindness, when to threaten and when to offer hope. Breaking a heretic was not simple brutality. It was a science, and Hadrian was a master scientist. The first heretic I broke under his supervision was a merchant accused of trading with xenos. The man claimed he had no choice, that his planet was cut off from imperial supply lines and his people were starving. The xenos offered food in exchange for simple goods. He took the trade. He fed his people. In any reasonable system, this might have been seen as pragmatic survival. But the Imperium is not reasonable. Contact with xenos is heresy. Intent does not matter. Circumstances do not matter. Only the law matters. Hadrian instructed me to begin with isolation. 7 days in the darkness with no food, only water. The merchant emerged from the cell weakened and disoriented. Perfect. Next came the confession chair. I strapped him in myself, my hands steady, my face expressionless. Hadrian stood behind me, watching, evaluating my technique. Begin with low intensity, he instructed. Build slowly. We want his mind intact for the later stages. I nodded and pressed the button. The merchant screamed. I felt nothing. Over the next 3 weeks, I broke him methodically. I whipped him. I starved him. I subjected him to the psychological conditioning that had broken me. I made him watch executions of other xenos sympathizers. I forced him to confess not just to his crime, but to imagine crimes, to desires he never had, to blasphemies he never spoke. And with each session, each application of pain, I felt a strange satisfaction growing inside me. Not pleasure. something else. A sense of purpose, of righteousness. I was doing the Emperor's work. By the end, the merchant was gone. What remained was Penitent 19, a shell that moved when commanded, spoke when ordered, believed what he was told to believe. Hadrian clapped me on the shoulder. "Well done," he said. "You have the gift. The Emperor has chosen you for this work." I believed him. Why would I not? I had been reborn in faith. Everything I did was his will. Every heretic I broke was saved from damnation. I was not a monster. I was a savior. The work became routine. A new heretic would arrive. I would process them through the 12 steps. They would break. They would be reborn. They would join the ranks of the penitent, or if they failed to break completely, they would be executed. I stopped counting after the 50th. They were not people anymore. They were problems to be solved, stains to be cleansed, corruption to be burned away. The ecclesiarchy had taught me well. I had become exactly what they needed me to be. But the Imperium is vast and heresy is everywhere. The cathedral on Kratos Prime was just one facility among thousands. After 2 years of service, I was selected for a promotion. I would join a missionary fleet, traveling from world to world, identifying and purifying heretics wherever they were found. This was considered a great honor. Most penitents spent their entire lives in the cathedral where they were broken. To be chosen for missionary work meant the ecclesiarchy trusted me completely. I had proven myself worthy. The missionary fleet consisted of 3 ships. The St. Celestine's Grace, a massive cathedral ship that served as our base of operations. The Hammer of Faith, a frigate housing the Fraterus militia who would enforce our judgments. And the Purity's Light, a transport for moving prisoners and supplies. I was assigned quarters on the St. Celestine's Grace, a small cell not much larger than the one I had been imprisoned in during my own purification. This felt appropriate. I needed nothing more. Our first destination was an agri-world named Harvest Prime. The planetary governor had reported widespread heresy among the worker population. Specifically, they had begun worshipping the harvest itself, offering prayers to the crops rather than to the emperor. This was textbook heresy. The emperor alone deserved worship. Any prayer directed elsewhere was blasphemy punishable by death. But death was not enough. First, we needed to break them. We needed to understand how deep the corruption ran. We needed to purify as many as possible and execute the rest. We made planetfall near the capital city, a sprawling settlement built around massive grain silos. The Fraterus militia secured the area immediately. Then we began our work. Hadrian, now elevated to the rank of High Confessor, led the operation. I served as his second, commanding a team of 5 other penitents who had proven themselves reliable. Our task was to identify the ringleaders of the heretical cult and begin their purification. The investigation took 3 days. We interrogated hundreds of workers. Most were innocent, simple people who had failed to report their neighbors' heresy out of fear or misplaced loyalty. We marked them for re-education, 40 lashes and a month of prayer services. The actual heretics numbered 37. We arrested them all in a single night, the Fraterus militia kicking down doors and dragging terrified people from their beds. I felt no sympathy. These people had turned from the emperor. They deserved what was coming. We established a temporary purification facility in the governor's palace. The governor was more than happy to assist, terrified that his failure to root out heresy earlier might be seen as complicity. He provided us with chambers for confessions, cells for isolation, and an auditorium for public witnessing. Everything we needed to break the heretics of Harvest Prime. The work began the next morning. I took personal charge of 5 heretics, including the cult's leader, a woman named Eldar who had apparently been the first to suggest offering prayers to the harvest. Eldar was different from the other heretics I had broken. She was not stupid. She was not weak-minded. She was a true believer, convinced that the crops themselves were sacred manifestations of the emperor's will, that by honoring them she was honoring him. This made her dangerous. This made her important. If I could break her, if I could make her recant publicly, the rest of the cult would follow. If I failed, her martyrdom might inspire others. Hadrian impressed upon me the importance of this task. Do not simply break her, he instructed. Remake her. Make her see the error with such clarity that she becomes our greatest weapon against this heresy. I began with isolation. 14 days this time, longer than standard procedure. I wanted her weakened, desperate, ready for what came next. When I finally brought her to the confession chair, she could barely stand. Good. I strapped her in and stood before her, my face expressionless behind the skull mask that all confessors wore. Elara, I said, you are accused of heresy. Do you confess? She looked at me with eyes that held more pity than fear. I confess nothing, she said, her voice weak but defiant. I have only honored the Emperor's gifts. How is that heresy? I pressed the button. She screamed. The sound echoed off the stone walls of the chamber. I let the current flow for 10 seconds, then released. She gasped, her body trembling in the restraints. The Emperor alone is worthy of worship, I stated. To honor his gifts above him is to place creation before Creator. That is heresy. Do you understand? She was silent for a moment, catching her breath. Then she spoke again. The crops feed billions. Without them, the people starve. Without the people, there is no Imperium. I honored the crops so the Imperium might endure. How is that turning from him? Her logic was flawed, of course. The Imperium endures because of faith, not food. Faith can move mountains. Faith can survive any hardship. Food is temporary. Faith is eternal. I explained this to her patiently, in the same tone Hadrian had used with me years ago. Then I pressed the button again. And again. And again. Each time she screamed. Each time I explained why she was wrong. Each time I felt the satisfaction of doing the Emperor's work. By the end of the first session, she was broken and weeping, her voice hoarse from screaming. But she had not confessed. Not truly. I would need more time. Elara was different from the other heretics I had broken. She was not stupid. She was not weak-minded. She was a true believer, convinced that the crops themselves were sacred manifestations of the Emperor's will, that by honoring them she was honoring him. This made her dangerous. This made her important. If I could break her, if I could make her recant publicly, the rest of the cult would follow. If I failed, her martyrdom might inspire others. Hadrian impressed upon me the importance of this task. Do not simply break her, he instructed. Remake her. Make her see the error with such clarity that she becomes our greatest weapon against this heresy. I began with isolation. 14 days this time, longer than standard procedure. I wanted her weakened, desperate, ready for what came next. When I finally brought her to the confession chair, she could barely stand. Good. I strapped her in and stood before her, my face expressionless behind the skull mask that all confessors wore. Elara, I said, you are accused of heresy. Do you confess? She looked at me with eyes that held more pity than fear. I confess nothing, she said, her voice weak but defiant. I have only honored the Emperor's gifts. How is that heresy? I pressed the button. She screamed. The sound echoed off the stone walls of the chamber. I let the current flow for 10 seconds, then released. She gasped, her body trembling in the restraints. The Emperor alone is worthy of worship, I stated. To honor his gifts above him is to place creation before Creator. That is heresy. Do you understand? She was silent for a moment, catching her breath. Then she spoke again. The crops feed billions. Without them, the people starve. Without the people, there is no Imperium. I honored the crops so the Imperium might endure. How is that turning from him? Her logic was flawed, of course. The Imperium endures because of faith, not food. Faith can move mountains. Faith can survive any hardship. Food is temporary. Faith is eternal. I explained this to her patiently, in the same tone Hadrian had used with me years ago. Then I pressed the button again. And again. And again. Each time she screamed. Each time I explained why she was wrong. Each time I felt the satisfaction of doing the Emperor's work. By the end of the first session, she was broken and weeping, her voice hoarse from screaming. But she had not confessed. Not truly. I would need more time. Over the next month, I subjected Eldar to every technique in the ecclesiarchy's arsenal: physical penance, psychological conditioning, forced witnessing of executions. I brought in the other cultists one by one and had them recant before her, showing her that her followers had abandoned her cause. Some recanted genuinely, broken by the purification process. Others recanted falsely, saying what they knew we wanted to hear, their eyes still holding the spark of defiance. Those ones I executed immediately. I would not tolerate false faith, true breaking or true death. There was no middle ground. But Eldar remained unbroken. She confessed to heresy, yes. She accepted her punishment. But in her eyes I could still see belief. She still thought she had been right to honor the harvest. She had simply learned not to say it aloud. This was unacceptable. Hadrian reviewed my progress and frowned. "You are being too gentle," he said. "You still remember mercy from your old life. You must excise that weakness. There is no room for mercy in the Emperor's justice. Only purity through absolute suffering." He was right. I had been holding back, some fragment of my old self restraining my hand. I had to kill that fragment. I had to become what the ecclesiarchy needed me to be. So I stopped thinking of Eldar as a person. She was corruption given form. She was a disease that needed to be burned out. She was nothing. I resumed her purification with renewed focus. I stopped giving her time to recover between sessions. I pushed her to the absolute limits of human endurance. I broke bones and let them heal crooked. I burned flesh and let it scar. I destroyed her body methodically, scientifically, precisely. And finally, after 6 weeks of constant torture, something changed. I saw it in her eyes during a confession session. The light of defiance guttered and died. She was not pretending anymore. She truly believed she had been wrong. She truly believed the Emperor demanded this suffering. She truly believed I was saving her. "Confessor," she whispered, her voice barely audible through her ruined throat. "Thank you. Thank you for showing me the truth. I was blind. I was a fool. I deserve this pain. I deserve more. Please continue. Purify me completely." I had done it. I had broken her completely. Hadrian was pleased. We prepared Eldar for her public recantation. The event was held in the main square of Harvest Prime's capital. 10,000 citizens gathered to watch. The remaining members of the cult were brought out in chains. And Eldar, now penitent 27, stood before them all and spoke. "I was a heretic," she proclaimed, her voice amplified by vox casters. "I turned from the Emperor's light. I honored his gifts above him. I deserved death. But the merciful ecclesiarchy has granted me the chance for redemption through service. I will spend the rest of my life breaking other heretics, showing them the error of their ways, saving their souls as mine was slashed." The crowd roared its approval. The cultists wept, some in relief at seeing their leader spared, others in despair at seeing her so completely changed. And I stood to the side watching my work bear fruit. I felt pride. Not the sinful pride of ego, but the righteous pride of duty fulfilled. I had saved Eldar's soul. I had prevented her martyrdom from inspiring others. I had turned the cult's greatest strength into a weapon against heresy. The ecclesiarchy's methods worked. They always worked. You just had to apply them correctly. We spent 3 more months on Harvest Prime, purifying the remaining cultists and re-educating the population. When we left, the planet was compliant once more. The workers prayed only to the Emperor. The harvest continued without heretical rituals. And Eldar remained behind, serving the local ecclesiarchy, breaking heretics in my name. It was a perfect outcome. This became my pattern. Travel to a world. Identify heresy. Break the heretics. Move on. World after world, year after year, I became more efficient, more skilled, more devoted to my purpose. I broke thousands. I saved thousands. I served the Emperor without question or doubt. But then came Secundus Tertius and everything changed. Secundus Tertius was a hive world, much like Kratos Prime where I had been arrested so many years ago. The heresy there was different from what we usually encountered. Not worship of false gods. Not sympathy with xenos. Not even doubt in the emperor's divinity. This was something stranger. A philosophical movement had emerged among the Hive scholars, questioning not the emperor himself, but the interpretation of his will by the ecclesiarchy. They called themselves the rationalists. They argued that the emperor, in his mortal life, had championed reason and science over superstition and blind faith. They argued that the current ecclesiarchy had perverted his teachings, turning irrational philosophy into mystical dogma. They argued that true service to the emperor meant pursuing knowledge and understanding, not simply obeying priests who claimed to speak for him. This was dangerous heresy. Not because it rejected the emperor, but because it might appeal to intelligent, educated people who could spread it far and wide. We arrested the movement's leaders. 23 scholars, teachers, and minor nobility. Hadrian assigned me to break their leader, a man named Kalen who had written the foundational texts of the rationalist philosophy. Kalen was in his 50s, gray-haired and dignified even in chains. He did not resist arrest. He did not beg for mercy. He simply looked at me with calm, analytical eyes and said, "I assume you will torture me now. I am prepared for that. Do what you must." His composure unnerved me, though I did not show it. I began the standard process: isolation, confession chair, physical penance. But Kalen responded differently from other heretics. He did not break under torture. Instead, he analyzed it. During our confession sessions, he would discuss the techniques I used, the psychological principles behind them, the ways the ecclesiarchy had weaponized human suffering. "You are using pain to bypass rational thought," he observed calmly after one particularly brutal session. "The mind cannot maintain complex reasoning while experiencing extreme agony. It becomes suggestible, accepting whatever narrative ends the pain. Clever, but ultimately it produces compliance, not genuine belief." His words disturbed me in ways I could not articulate. I increased the intensity of his purification. More pain, more conditioning, more witnessing of executions. But Kalen remained calm, analytical, infuriatingly reasonable. He confessed to heresy when I demanded it. He recited scripture when I commanded it. But I could see in his eyes that he was simply saying what I wanted to hear. He had not broken. He had adapted. He was too intelligent to be broken by conventional means. I needed something more. They left me in the darkness. 7 days of isolation to begin. 7 days to contemplate my sins. 7 days before the real torture began. But I did not spend those days in contemplation. I spent them planning. The conditioning had made me obedient, compliant, unable to resist direct orders. But it had not made me stupid. I knew the purification process intimately. I knew its schedules, its procedures, its weaknesses. And I knew that if I was going to escape, it had to be now, before they moved me to the confession chair. After that, I would be lost. On the 6th day they brought my meal. A servitor pushed it through the slot at the bottom of the door as always. But servitors are predictable. They follow programmed routines without deviation. This servitor would check that the meal had been taken before returning to its duties. When it bent down to look through the slot, I was ready. I had removed the thin metal utensil from the previous day's meal. Not a weapon exactly, but sharp enough. I drove it through the servitor's eye lens, deep into the circuitry beyond. It spasmed and collapsed. I pulled the servitor's body partway into the cell and took its access key. Then I opened the door and stepped into the corridor. Alarms had not sounded yet. The servitor's shutdown had not been noticed. I had perhaps 5 minutes before someone investigated. I used those minutes to run. Not toward the ship's docking bays. Those would be guarded. Not toward any official exit. But toward the maintenance sections, the areas where only servitors and tech priests went. Places a penitent would never be expected to go. I found a maintenance airlock, meant for disposing of waste and damaged components into space. It was not designed for human use. It was barely large enough for a person to fit through. But it was my only chance. I opened the inner door and stepped inside. The space was cramped, dark and cold. Through the outer door I could see the stars. Freedom. Or death. At this point, I was not sure there was a difference. I sealed the inner door and reached for the outer door controls. Then I hesitated. If I opened that door without a void suit, I would die in seconds. Vacuum exposure. Decompression. A painful but quick death. But what waited for me if I stayed? Reconditioning. Transformation into something even less than what I already was. Eternal service to an institution I now knew was corrupt. I had two choices and neither was good. But one was final. One was escape. I pressed the button. The outer door opened, and I was pulled into the void. But I did not die. At least not immediately. Because at the last second, I grabbed onto the airlock's outer rim. The vacuum pulled at me, trying to drag me into space. My lungs burned as the air was sucked from them. My blood began to boil in my veins. My vision went dark at the edges. But I held on. And I saw, less than 10 meters away, a maintenance shuttle attached to the hull. If I could reach it, if it was unlocked, if I could survive long enough to get inside. I kicked off from the airlock, propelling myself toward the shuttle. The movement was clumsy. I tumbled through space, completely disoriented. But momentum carried me forward. I hit the shuttle's hull hard, my fingers scrabbling for purchase on the smooth metal. I found a handle and pulled myself toward the access hatch. My consciousness was fading. My body was shutting down. But I reached the hatch. I slammed my palm against the control panel. And by some miracle it opened. The shuttle was unlocked. I pulled myself inside and sealed the hatch behind me. Atmosphere flooded the shuttle. I gasped, drawing air into my damaged lungs. Every breath was agony. My body was severely injured from vacuum exposure. But I was alive. Against all odds, I was alive. And I was free. I collapsed on the shuttle floor, coughing blood, my vision swimming. Behind me, alarms were surely sounding on the St. Celestine's grace. They would be searching for me. They would find the disabled servitor, the opened airlock. They would know I had escaped. But by then I would be gone. This is how the ecclesiarchy breaks heretics. Through isolation and pain. Through psychological conditioning and public humiliation. Through the systematic destruction of identity and will. Through the replacement of self with dogma. They turn people into weapons against themselves and others. They create monsters who believe they are saints. They build an empire of broken souls, all serving a god emperor who may never have wanted such service. And the worst part is that it works. It works because humans are fragile. Because pain overwhelms reason. Because eventually everyone breaks. I broke. Elara broke. Kalen probably broke after I escaped. We all break in the end. The ecclesiarchy has had 10,000 years to perfect their techniques. They know exactly how to dismantle a human mind and rebuild it in their image. They are very good at what they do. And that is the most terrifying thing of all. Not that they are cruel, but that they are effective. Not that they torture, but that their torture produces results. They break heretics. They break them completely. And they call it salvation. But here, on this forgotten colony world, I have learned something the ecclesiarchy does not teach. Breaking is not permanent. Healing is possible. It is slow. It is painful in its own way. But it is possible. I will never be the man I was before the Cathedral of Eternal Penance. Marcus Vale died in that place. But I am not Penitent 14 anymore either. That thing died when I chose freedom over obedience. What I am now is something new. Something built from the wreckage of who I was. Something that still believes in the Emperor, but rejects the ecclesiarchy's interpretation of his will. I do not know how much time I have left. Months. Maybe years. Maybe only days. But I will spend that time trying to heal. Trying to help others. Trying to be the person the ecclesiarchy prevented me from being. And if they find me, if they drag me back to their cathedral, if they strap me into the confession chair one final time, I will remember this. I will remember that I chose freedom. I will remember that I saw through.